All right, so it is 1 o'clock on the dot, and we are going to get started. Thank you so much for whether you're catching this live or you are catching the replay of this office half hours. I think that I need to update the name, but I'm so glad to have you. So glad to have you here and to talk about all of these things that we didn't really talk about enough. Time management and charting. We don't talk about it enough when we are students. We definitely don't talk about it enough constructively once we're out in practice. We tend to talk to each other and to talk about everything that's going wrong, but there seems to be a real shortage of solutions. So I'm happy to be part of the solution. I always think of my seventh and eighth grade science teacher who I didn't like, who used to say, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. What a corny way to say it, but I do agree with the sentiment. So speaking of being part of the solution, I've got some questions that I want to, that I'm going to delve into. If you are struggling with charting and time management related stuff and you have something that you'd like to bring up in front of the class, definitely raise your hand or send me a message offline if you're catching this on the replay. You can send me a message offline and we'll talk about what it is. So we can bring it up. We don't need to say your name. We can leave it broad. I will only use your name if I have your permission. So, we're not going to do that. This isn't about shaming anybody. This is about making it ideally better for everybody if we can. So feel free, you can send me a message, tell me what your specific either time management or charting challenge is, or if you have a question or you have a situation, just send me a message. You can post it in the group as well, or message if you'd like to be a little bit more discreet. Nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to get into some of the things that we have, questions that we have that have come up. But I wanted to talk first about just a tip, right? Something that you can consider. I read an article recently about habit stacking. I don't know if you've heard of this. I didn't know it had a name. And so it does. It's called habit stacking. And it's not a bad idea. And what it is pairing up, the name kind of explains it to an extent. Pairing up something that you already routinely do with something that you want to start doing, right? Or want to start doing more of, and you need some sort of prompt or some sort of way to make it part of your routine. I'm a big fan of making things like having a system and automating things as much as possible, right? So I get up at the same time every day. So I have an alarm on my phone that is set for 6 a.m. every single day. I don't set the alarm before I go to bed. It just is, right? And I don't have to think about it. It's one less thing to think about. And that means I can devote that energy, even if it's just like a little fragment, a little filament of energy. If I can devote that to something else, to me, that's better. That's an improvement. Okay. So that's something that works for me. Habit stacking is similar, right? In terms of like what the net result is. You could say it's about building good habits or reinforcing good habits, and that's true. But it's also about just automating things, right? And making these things so that you don't have to think about them because we have so much that we can be thinking about, right? So let's look at these things we don't need to think about. So in the article that I was reading, I'll see if I can track it down and share it with you guys, but I'll give you a little synopsis too, because you're here. You don't need to do it twice. So in the article that I was reading, they used an example of getting your steps in while you're brushing your teeth, right? You're not necessarily, most people are not going to forget to brush their teeth. That's part of the daily routine, morning, evening, you just do it, right? It's not something you have to look at your calendar. It's not something you need to have a reminder for. You just do it. You brush your teeth. It's part of the day to day. And if you build in this habit stacking, so the getting the steps in, if you walk in place while you brush your teeth, it's a way to get that many more steps in. It's a way to, while you're already brushing your teeth anyway, I'm a little bit not super coordinated, so it might be a little hard for me, or it would take a little getting used to, but it's not a bad idea. And you just do it. So as you're already doing something that you're going to do regularly, you're stacking in this other habit to make it better. There are definitely applications for that when it comes to time management. It depends on the person, I think, right? So I think there are options where you might be doing, if you have admin time and you are cranking through your notes, you could, depending, you might be able to do a podcast, listen to a podcast to either expand your knowledge base or maybe get some CME as well. That's something that you could do together. I personally would find that a little, I'm a monotasker. I can't do like a bunch of stuff at once. Not well. Anyway, I could try, but I'm not good at it. So for me, that would be a little bit challenging, but for other people, it might actually be really, really helpful. It might also help to tune out some of those distractions. Other ways that you could, how else could you do habit stacking in a clinical setting? Um, hmm. Well, everybody's favorite prior auths. You're on the phone, right? You're on hold for prior auths. While you are on hold for prior auths, you could be resulting normal labs. You could be finishing a note, perhaps. If you have a few open notes that really just need to be like signed, you just need to push the button, but you haven't, you could give them that last review. When I dictate notes, I always read through them before I actually close them. That could be something that you could do while you're on hold. That could be a habit stacking. If you need to do a meeting, does your office do like a WebEx meeting? Do you do them like that? So it's sort of like it's virtual, you're there, but you're not there. You could have a split screen. You could be doing more than one thing at once. So think about how that could work for you. What are things that could combine together in a way that made sense, that didn't create more work, and that got you across that finish line a little faster? That's how I would recommend looking at habit stacking for time management. You could do that with your physical exam as well. As you're with the patient, you can kind of combine some things. You could be asking them about the body system that you're assessing at the same time. You need to have a certain amount of facility or even expectation with what you're assessing, right? So, and it also depends what you're assessing. So you can definitely ask questions. I think it's very easy to incorporate this if you're doing like a range of motion assessment. So if you have some specific questions about that, their shoulder hurts, right? I've got a neck thing. So you're doing, okay, I'm doing my neck stuff. And you can ask me, what have you used for it? How long have you been feeling this? When did it get worse? What's the kind of trajectory, HPI, that sort of thing. As you're doing your objective assessment, you can be asking those questions instead of having the conversation and then having the assessment. You can do those two together. You can kind of combine them. You could, excuse me, this one's a little bit icky, but you could do it when you're doing like women's health. If you're doing a pelvic exam, you could ask about if they're having their period every month, if there's been any changes. Is it heavier? Is it lighter? Is it shorter? Is it longer? Whatever those particulars are. It's nice to have a little bit of small talk while you're doing a pelvic exam. I worked in women's health for quite a while, and that's something that, you don't want to just be, most patients I found did not want to just be there having the pelvic exam. No one really wants to. But if you can have some kind of rapport, some kind of conversation going, it makes it a little easier, or at least passes the time a little bit faster. And I think that if you are asking questions that are relative to the body system that you're assessing, it also helps you to remember it a little bit better when the time comes to document. If you ask about menstrual history while you're assessing, their back, that might be harder to remember. So you could use that sort of habit stacking concept as you're going through your visit. I actually got my hair cut today, and my hairdresser was telling me, oh, my toe's been hurting. And I said, oh, this is so funny because I've just been doing a bunch of stuff and using the example of a patient with gout as like an easy visit, a quick visit. And as I've been creating these lectures about this, I keep going back to gout for whatever reason. And it sounds like she has gout, and she hasn't been seen in quite a while. So it may end up that I end up treating her gout, but we'll get to that. But, so as if I were to be seeing her, as I'm talking to her about her gout and history and that sort of thing, how long have the symptoms been present? What makes them worse? What makes them better? What have you tried? What worked? What didn't work? Those sorts of things. I want to be basically down there at her foot kind of touching it, wiggling the toes around, that sort of thing, looking at the two different feet to compare. So as you're doing that, it kind of makes the visit go a little faster. You can sort of fast track it a little bit. Once you do that frequently, you can get used to it and it can make it easier to kind of incorporate those two factors, right? So that's habit stacking. That's the concept of habit stacking. It is not, it is in no way exclusive just to the clinical environment. Do it with anything, the example that I read was on like, some popular news website. So it wasn't in any, it wasn't like the Journal of the American Medical Association or anything like that. It was this broad popular press piece, and they were talking about brushing your teeth and getting your steps in. So it can definitely be done in so many different ways. Even things like commuting, listening to an educational podcast, or maybe a fun podcast, right? What's wrong with having fun? But those are things that you can do at the same time, right? Um, it's great to get stuff done while you're commuting because commuting sucks. Nobody enjoys commuting. So that's a prime opportunity for some habit stacking, right? So think about ways that can work for you. If you've got some excellent ideas, let us know. If you've got things that might help other people, let us know. If you have questions for me, let me know. Speaking of questions, so let's get to a question that came up with actually a client of mine. So it wasn't any of you guys, but a coaching client of mine. And she was talking about some of the complexity of her patients, right? So working in a federally qualified healthcare center. So if you're not familiar, these are really most of the people that work there from the clinician side tend to be people who are in support of the mission, in favor of the mission, but also are receiving some sort of student loan repayment assistance, right? So this is something where people will work there for 2 to 4 to 5 years and get a big chunk of their student loans forgiven. And this is the case for her. And the patients that tend to go there, so they get, huge government money. The facilities do, the clinics do, to subsidize this care. And a lot of patients may be uninsured or they may be Medicaid, Medicare, underinsured, this sort of thing. And a lot of the patients might not speak English. They may not be great at engaging with care. They may have fallen out of care for some period of time and now something is wrong and that's kind of brought them in and we kind of uncover and find out there's so much more going on. So these are great clinical settings, but they're very challenging to work in for a lot of reasons because of the underinsured or uninsured aspect. There is a big financial component and there's a lot of volume to make up for that, right? So these are not places where you're going to see 10 patients a day. These are not places where you're going to get a 30-minute visit. These are places where you are going to have a schedule of 20 patients a day and you are going to be really double booked. So you're going to have an official schedule of 20 patients and you're going to really have 30 people on your schedule each day. A lot of them are going to no-show. You're going to get add-ons all the time. People are going to be late. There's going to be all these kind of like shifting sands. It's a very, very challenging place to work. It can be gratifying as well, but it comes at a cost to you. These are places, if you work at an FQHC, definitely comment, right? And talk about your experience if you feel comfortable. But if you work in these places, it's really hard to strike the balance. And this is what this client was talking with me about. Striking the balance between having compassion for the patient and compassion for herself. This definitely ties into time management. If you're working in a situation where on paper you're supposed to be seeing 20 patients a day and in reality you end up getting 30 a day scheduled and maybe it shakes out to like 22 or 25 depending on like no shows and cancellations and stuff. That is a time management challenge there. That's tough to work with. But then the fact that things are changing, like this shifting sands is the only word I can think of to describe it, because when you walk in at the beginning of your day, you kind of don't know what to expect. It doesn't matter what's written on paper because it's going to change. You're going to have add-ons, you're going to have double books, you're going to have all these different things. And it also is this, or they also, FQHC clinics tend to do primary care. So that means the patients can be coming in for anything. This isn't a dentistry clinic, right? Where if it looks like they have gout, that's not you, right? This is primary care, so it can be anything under the sun. It can also be everything under the sun. And it can be a situation where wanting to do the right thing comes at the expense of other patients, running on time, being manageable in your visit, right? And that is a recipe for burnout. I am sure that there are people who've worked in an FQHC for 20 years. Like, I'm sure they're out there, but I think they're the minority because this is such difficult work. Primary care is tough enough as it is. Like, it's a tough discipline. We think of like emergency medicine as like this, like macho kind of balls to the wall thing. And it is, right? There's that. But we really should be looking at primary care as like a slow speed version of that because it's very, very similar. And when you put the different factors that go into the FQHC into the equation, it just makes it even tougher. The other thing is, at least in the emergency room, when those patients are done with that episode and they get sent to wherever their next stop is, whether it's discharged to home, admitted to the hospital, follow up with primary care, they become someone else's issue, right? And the providers in the emergency room just go next, right? We don't get that luxury in primary care. They're our problem. We have to continue to untangle whatever the knot is and solve whatever the puzzle is, no matter what. The bucks, all roads lead to primary care. So this client was talking about trying to strike this balance between having compassion for the patients, which, ideally we should have, but compassion for herself. And she was working 3 days a week. So something like, scheduled something like 24 hours, 3/8. And she, so she's doing 3/8. It's 24 hours of scheduled time. And I don't know what she was, what her compensation was, but, I'm sure it was commensurate with that. So she's making, roughly a little bit more than half-time salary. Okay. But she's spending 12 hours a week outside of those patient-facing hours charting. And the patient-facing hours are 24 on paper, but they're never 24 in reality because the patient shows up 45 minutes late for their physical, but you still see them. The patient shows up with an appointment that is scheduled for lab review, but they've got gout, or they're having chest pain, or they're having abdominal pain, and you can't just brush that under the rug. You have to investigate that, and that's something that is going to take time in the visit and in your day because you're going to send them out, and then they're going to come back, go to the lab, go to imaging, come back. So it's really tough. It's tough to maintain those levels of compassion when you are drained. When you're drained in every way that you can imagine. How do you do that? I don't have an answer. I don't, sorry. I wish I did. I wish I did. I wish it was easy. I wish there was something simple that we could do or not do, or something we could ask for and get or not get. But I wish it was just one switch that we had to flip to make the difference there. And it isn't. So I guess I throw this to you. What do you do when it comes to striking that balance and maintaining the compassion for yourself? Because if you can't pour from an empty cup, and if you are completely drained, you're going to have nothing left to give. If you are working 24 hours, that really turns into 26, 28, 30, seeing face to face with patients, and then another 10 or 12 charting on that. That's sustainable? Not, right? Like, it's obviously not. You can't continue to do that. There are some things that I would do in that situation. I would want to be able to limit what we talk about in a visit. It takes about 10 minutes to really, in a primary care setting, adequately and safely assess a concern. So depending how long you have for your visit, if you have a 15-minute visit, you're only going to really get to like one thing, maybe two, if you kind of cut some corners. If you have a little longer, 20, 30 minutes, you can get a little bit more done. So one of the first things I would want to know is, how much time do we have in the visits? And how do we set those expectations for the patients. And where does that start? Because it ends with us, but it doesn't start with us. We actually have no say in it. Right? They show up and they're there in the room and you're there in the room, and what are you going to do? Right? How are you going to turn them away? If it's an emergent situation, you're not going to turn them away, right? Unless you're going to send them to the emergency room. But if it's somebody who is not likely to really come back and you really want to strike while the iron is hot, you have no choice, right? Or you feel that you have no choice. So what are these like upstream factors, and how can we kind of come to some kind of consensus, right? Because she doesn't work at this FQHC alone, right? It's always, there's staff, there's, a bunch of colleagues. How do they get what they need? Because everybody's having the same experience. So it's tough. It's really tough. I think that reaching out to your colleagues and knowing what they're experiencing and knowing how they're affected by it too, there's strength in numbers. So building some kind of community around that, not just bitching about it. That's fine in the short term, but it's not really ultimately constructive. But can you do that in a constructive way? Can you vent with each other and learn, hey, maybe everybody's having the exact same problem? Can we get some objective data about this? Can we, it's one thing to be like, I feel like every time every single patient is 20 minutes late and every single patient has 20 things that they want to talk about. Is that reality? It might be, right? But you need to get that objective data. You can get that from just a piece of paper, write a notebook and write that down for a week, 2 weeks, a month. Is every patient that you see falling into this same kind of criteria where they're arriving late, or every day I've got 10 double booked patients, or every day I'm spending all this extra time on charting, and then bringing that to leadership. They may not be interested. They may be interested but not able to help, right? Because they've got their own constraints as well. But nothing is going to change if we don't use our voices. Sometimes it's a matter of writing it out, right? And it's just, you're going to get there, you're going to get across the finish line to get that chunk of your student loans forgiven, and then you're on to the next, wherever that's going to be. It's an awful way to live for 3 years, 5 years, whatever the case may be. It's an awful way to live. It's an awful way to work. How long would it take you to get burnt out? And what would it look like if you did get burnt out, right? So for ourselves, for those who will come after us, I do this a lot. What's that, right? But for ourselves and for those who come after us, we owe it to us and to our patients ultimately, right? Because if we get burnt out and leave the profession, that's not good for patients either. We owe it to ourselves to use our voices, to support each other, and to make our concerns known. There are things that we can do to take our power back and to take our control back. And there are times when, despite those efforts, no change happens and you just have to find a way through it. But I would recommend really looking critically when these things happen, looking for those opportunities to track objective data. Because if you are going to go to leadership and you are going to ask for some kind of concessions or some kind of middle ground, or just alert them to an issue that you're spending 12 hours charting for 24 hours worth of work, then if they're ever going to make any kind of changes because of that, it's going to come from objective data. And by objective data, I mean things that are like court of law type stuff, right? Like there's no denying it. So if you walk in at 8 a.m. or whatever the start of your day is, and you have 30 people in 20 slots, that's objective data, right? And if you punch the clock and show up at 8 a.m. and your last scheduled visit ends at 5, and then you are still charting until 10 p.m., that's objective data. Those are the things that cannot be argued. Now, yeah, it's possible that somebody could pick it apart and say, well, are you being as effective as you can be with your charting? Someone's always going to be able to say that. But the facts of the matter, look at them. It can confirm that you are actually struggling with something. Like there is an actual problem here. It's not just that it feels like it's a problem. No, it's an actual problem. And then something can be done, steps can be taken, theoretically, to address that problem. You can get to the root cause, you can understand, there's all different kinds of ways, right? You can put in systems that can help with that habit stacking. Some version of the habit stacking, like we talked about, is an example of a system that can help with flow and with process. But none of that's going to come unless we have compassion for ourselves first and we inform that compassion with objective data and we share that, right? We share that with one another and realize we're not alone because it's like a divide and conquer thing, right? If you're on your own and you're feeling like, oh God, it's just me, I don't want anybody else to know. Then you talk to this one and you talk to that one and you realize, well, we have our own twists on it, but we are really kind of experiencing the same thing. Hold up, right? What's that? So there's strength in numbers too. So compassion with yourself, objective data, and the community of it. You're not alone. All of this stuff, charting, time management, no one has been taught. Anybody has learned from trial and error. Me too. Like I'm great at it. It's trial and error. I didn't go like get some certification in time management. I think it would be funny to actually do that, right? Like maybe I'll start a time management school and I'll offer some sort of like, you know, TMC, time management certified. But for right now, it doesn't exist. So there's no certification. I just paid attention to what worked for me, did more of the things that worked for me, less or zero of the things that didn't work for me, that didn't get me across the finish line faster. And that's kind of it. I mean, really, in essence, that's the in a nutshell, right? That's the core of it. But knowing where other people stand, we have to work on dropping our guard a little bit because the more we have our guard up, the less that we're going to know that we're not alone because nobody has been taught this and we're all figuring it out as we go. Some of us, maybe have a little bit of a leg up, have reached out for support to other people, to colleagues, to coaches, read a book, that sort of stuff. But don't suffer in silence because that does nobody any good. That might do your employer some good, but it's going to harm you and it is going to compromise your patient care, right? That's not what we signed up for. That's not why we went to school, right? To do a half-assed job, to hate our work, to work all the fucking time. Like, no, that's not why we spent all that time and money and energy to go back to school, to grad school. That's not it. Nope, that's not it. So that is our office half hour. I'm so glad that you're here. I am so happy to answer any questions. I really do love talking about this stuff. I know I say that all the time, but it's nuts. So let me know. Let me know what's going on. Let me know what you would like to have better and what you think I might be able to help you with. And we'll do that. Otherwise, I will see you next Tuesday. I will see you next Tuesday for our next office half hour. And yeah, take care.